At dawn, somewhere deep within the Mekong River Delta, a South Vietnamese river assault group moves against the Viet Cong. With it goes a young American Navy lieutenant. He serves in a guerrilla war of seek and destroy. Yet here, far from destroyer and aircraft carrier, he is the American Navy in Vietnam. On Yankee Station, somewhere in the South China Sea, another more familiar view of the American Navy in Vietnam. The mammoth Kitty Hawk, second largest of U.S. attack carriers, turns into the wind to launch its airborne striking force. Not far away, along the coast, other units of the U.S. 7th Fleet take careful aim, on call from troops fighting ashore, and place supporting fire on Viet Cong concentrations. Farther south, another kind of armed strength prepares to go ashore, the most effective means known for gaining and holding a piece of ground, the individual fighting man, the United States Marine.
It's a packed building office. Alan speaking. Can I help you, sir?
Inland at Saigon, a Navy chief works at a different kind of job, less glamorous, but vitally important.
Nichols, the assignment desk clerk will help you, sir.
Behind the guns and planes and fighting men is a staff of Navy, Army, and Air Force personnel who administers support activities for Allied forces throughout the country.
And your date you arrived in Vietnam, sir?
3 August.
3 August.
Here, let's look for the baby.
East of Saigon, at a small village near the coast, these men have gone beyond their basic mission of military action to launch an equally important campaign of civic action, another side of the American Navy in Vietnam. To these men, their work on projects which will result in civic achievement is just as important as the work their shipmates do in more conventional naval surroundings. I'm Chet Huntley. To most of us, this is the United States Navy, the aircraft carrier, the cruiser, and destroyer, the modern deep-water Navy, extending American strength across the oceans of the world. But in Vietnam, the American Navy has done an unprecedented variety of different jobs. It has held command responsibility for all support activities. With the Army, it has been advisor to the South Vietnamese and has sent the Marines to help fight the land war. With the Air Force, it flies the planes which provide air power. And with civilian agencies, it pursues a vigorous program of civic action. These are the all-around capabilities demonstrated by a modern, versatile naval force in action. The American Navy in Vietnam. July 1964. Off the coast of Vietnam, units of the United States 7th Fleet patrol the waters of the South China Sea. To help the people of South Vietnam defend themselves against the threat of an armed communist takeover, the United States and other countries have begun a flow of economic, technical, and financial aid, a joint civilian-military effort to build a stronger nation. A small but dedicated South Vietnamese Navy is hard at work in an effort to deny the use of the rivers and coastal waters as supply routes for the Viet Cong. To bring knowledge of new techniques which can increase efficiency, a United States Military Assistance Command has been established. American Navy advisors work with the Vietnamese and help in many phases of training. HEADSUPACT, the United States Navy Headquarters Support Activity, has been established in Saigon. Already in mid-1964, the American Navy is in Vietnam. At the end of July 1964, the United States Military Assistance Command reports an increase in Viet Cong forces in South Vietnam. Then the Navy's role in Vietnam suddenly expands. August 2nd, the United States Navy destroyer Maddox, on patrol in international waters of the Gulf of Tonkin, begins to track three unknown craft approaching from the northwest. They are identified as North Vietnamese PT boats, armed with torpedoes and 37mm guns. When warnings from the Maddox fail to stop the oncoming PT boats, she opens fire. The attack prompts the United States to strengthen its ready defense capabilities.
The destroyer was carrying out a mission of patrol in those waters, in international waters. When it was attacked, it replied to the attack. It continued to carry out its mission today and will do so the remainder of this week. In the same waters, the President has asked that the destroyer force be doubled and that an aircraft, a combat air patrol, be available at all times on call to it. And as I think you know, he's issued instructions that in the event of a further attack upon our vessels in international waters, we are to respond with the objective of destroying the attackers.
The Maddox, joined by the destroyer Sea Turner Joy, resumes its routine patrol. But the next night, the men on watch in the two destroyers once again detect unidentified contacts on radar. The attack by the North Vietnamese boats is renewed. After a 3-hour running battle in which two of the PT boats are sunk, the attackers break contact.
My fellow Americans, the performance of commanders and crews in this engagement is in the highest tradition of the United States Navy. But repeated acts of violence against the armed forces of the United States must be met not only with alert defense, but with positive reply.
By the end of March 1965, air operations from Navy carriers in the South China Sea are underway on a daily basis. Also in March, in Operation Dagger Thrust, an integrated Navy-Marine Corps effort, 7th Fleet Marines land at Da Nang, then at Chu Lai, and later on the Bung Mu Peninsula. On land, the Allied forces fight to turn the tide of conflict from a retreating defense against guerrilla attacks to an offensive strategy designed to defeat the Viet Cong. During 1965, the United States Navy, with its ability to move quickly on short notice, is called upon to reinforce the United States position. In the short time since the Tonkin Gulf incident, American naval power rapidly expands from a supporting role to a full-fledged naval task force. Embodied in the forces of the United States 7th Fleet is almost every facet of modern naval power. Cruisers like the USS Canberra are built for fast speeds and long endurance. The destroyer, indispensable to any naval action, is the workhorse of the fleet. The USS Bainbridge, a destroyer leader, is largest of the destroyer class, the world's first nuclear-powered guided missile frigate. Both cruisers and destroyers, in addition to their traditional deep water roles, have been called upon to play a special role in Vietnam.
Delta, this is Gamma 26 Charlie. Target number 201, bearing 13.
Whenever the need arises, ships of the 7th Fleet move quickly into position along the coast of Vietnam. Take their directions from a forward air controller or spotter who is in visual contact with the enemy.
Fire for effect, over.
This is Naval Gunfire Support, a mobile source of big gun reinforcement for friendly troops ashore. Meanwhile, standing farther offshore is the heart of the fighting fleet. In Vietnam, as never before, the aircraft carrier has proven her worth. From the huge Kitty Hawk to the even larger nuclear-powered Enterprise, the Navy's attack carriers have held the balance of power.
Stand by, clock, forward, VA-6, VA-1, and VA-3. Stand clear of the jet intakes and exhaust on VA-4s. Get clear to start. VA-4, VA-6, VA-1, and VA-3.
Fast, mobile, independent of political boundaries and agreements, The carrier can ready her flight deck on short notice, launch her air power as required. The modern attack carrier is a carefully coordinated organization of countless complex pieces of hardware and of hundreds of men who make the hardware work.
389. Wolf watching for flat slope, 3 Alpha Boiler. All right, clear stacks up, Roger.
From yeoman to machinist's mate, many of the men below decks work at the important traditional jobs, familiar in naval ships throughout the world.
What is the IFF on contact 330?
Other men must master newer skills and disciplines required by new technologies. In the Combat Information Center, equipped with the latest facilities for rapid communication and data handling, a complete picture of the surrounding tactical situation is kept up to the minute by sophisticated electronic and computerized systems.
Your pigeons 160, 80 miles, steer home plate, over.
In other spaces and compartments, the carrier is equipped to keep almost anything she carries, from a coffee pot to complex avionics gear in combat-ready condition.
This is a bit 7 Delta. We'll be running the Route 14 route recce from Pleiku down to Ban Mateau. There should be automatic weapons along the route. There's some artillery fire down just north of Ban Mateau.
In a sense, the final responsibility for the success of the carrier's mission rests with a small group of men whose job is to master the intricate operation of a $1 million fighting machine, the modern jet aircraft.
Okay, everybody get your radios and get the data down off the board here and you'll be ready to man them.
The carrier's primary mission is to put these men and their planes in the air and on target. Her mix of fighters, attack aircraft, and reconnaissance planes extends the carrier's strength for hundreds of miles. They seek out the enemy's strong points and selectively place striking power on targets where it will be most effective. Enemy supply routes and storage depots, dams and airfields, barracks and troop concentrations. One of the best examples of the range and flexibility of naval power is the modern amphibious operation, a coordinated Navy-Marine Corps action designed to bring force in readiness wherever it's needed, put it ashore, and hold a piece of ground. In the years since World War II, amphibious landing techniques have been refined, modernized, and speeded up. In Vietnam, amphibious assaults by forces of the United States 7th Fleet have driven the Viet Cong from many strongholds along the coast. It is typical of the cooperative effort in Vietnam that in this operation, a Navy amphibious ship provides a landing platform and fresh ammunition for Army helicopters, which will provide air support for United States and South Vietnamese soldiers and Marines on shore. One of the newest concepts in strike warfare is built around the LPH, or Amphibious Assault Ship, a completely equipped floating helicopter base with complete facilities for the service and control of an airborne assault.
Clearwater Control, this is Bravo 8-1. Airborne at 30. Flight of 16. Event 101-4, over.
Bravo 8-1, this is Clearwater. Roger. Your pigeons to Point Cairo, 28014. Over.
This is 8-1. Roger, out.
Introduction of the helicopter to amphibious operations has precipitated the greatest single tactical innovation since the Second World War, the technique of vertical envelopment. Marines are swiftly airlifted to land behind enemy positions, while the rest of the force assaults the beach. Completion of the mission is in the hands of the Fleet Marine, the Navy's most competent means of extending its power inland. It may be that the most unusual thing about the American Navy in Vietnam is the fact that it has played such an important role in Vietnam. The fact that the Navy, while it has carried out a wide range of assignments at sea, has also contributed heavily to the effort along the coast, in the rivers, and on shore. One of the most important jobs is the continuing patrol of Vietnamese coastal waters. Airborne patrols are flown day and night, around the clock, to ensure against infiltration of supplies and ammunition from the north.
Clean cut. This is Bluebird 3-0. Large cargo jump to position X-ray Romeo 7386. Request surface units investigate.
Bluebird 3-0, this is Clean Cut, roger out.
Suspicious contact report, sir.
Very well, thank you.
In Saigon, at the command center of U.S. Naval Forces, Vietnam, naval activities throughout the country are coordinated.
Mr. Epling? Bluebird 3-0 aircraft has a suspicious contact here in the restricted zone. He says it's a large...
One of the major efforts of this command is Operation Market Time, the Navy's name for the important task of coastal surveillance.
We have a destroyer and a WPB in the area. I recommend we send the destroyer down there to investigate this contact.
In this case, a destroyer escort is assigned to examine a suspicious contact reported by Air Patrol.
Holding for a second, Mika.
The Vietnamese Navy liaison officers assigned to each American ship check identity papers and cargo manifests to be certain that an innocent cargo of fish or rice does not conceal Viet Cong guns, supplies, and ammunition. Holds are open and inspected. Each day brings thousands of fishing and cargo junks to the river and coastal waters of Vietnam. The enormous task of Operation Market Time is to guard against the use of this normal marketing activity as a cover for smuggling and infiltration by the Viet Cong. In addition to destroyers and minesweepers, market time patrols are conducted by high-speed patrol craft called swift boats, and by cutters of the United States Coast Guard, whose crews are well experienced in this kind of work. One of the newest additions to the patrol efforts in Vietnam is the Navy's PBR. The PBR is a 31-foot plastic-hulled, water jet-propelled craft designed for high-speed operation in very shallow water. Quiet and highly maneuverable, it is used in Operation Game Warden, whose mission is to prohibit all Viet Cong movement in the Mekong River Delta. Patrols along the coast are coordinated with the Vietnamese Navy through its regional coastal surveillance centers, just as naval activities at all levels are coordinated between American and Vietnamese. Can Tho on the Bassac River is headquarters for Vietnamese River Assault Group 25. Here and at other bases throughout the country, officers and men of the United States Naval Advisory Group perform one of the most important roles of the American Navy in Vietnam. Side by side with his Vietnamese counterpart, the American advisor helps to fulfill the mission of the River Assault Group, to deny the waterways and hiding places of the Mekong Delta to the Viet Cong.
We suggest we alert the rank patrols to keep a careful eye on this area for the next couple nights.
A typical operation begins shortly after midnight, as troops load aboard the assault boats and start upriver. By the next morning, the assault group, which has moved several miles upriver to close with the Viet Cong force, launches its attack. In terms of numbers, these men who ride the river assault boats are few. In terms of the overall Navy commitment, their contribution is great. At a junk force base in the Delta, near the small fishing village of Tiem Tom, another U.S. naval advisor lives and works day in, day out with the men of Vietnamese Coastal Group 37. With his counterparts, the base commander, he takes part in every phase of the daily routine.
Papers all okay?
Together, they carry out the daily patrols, constantly checking against the possible infiltration of Viet Cong supplies on the river waterways. Together, they share the meals prepared by the commander's wife.
What do we have for dinner tonight? Chicken. What's the Vietnamese name for this again? Chinh Ghe. Okay, well, Spanish omelet to me. Always be Spanish omelet.
Together, they relax when time permits, discuss their work, and the small matters of personal concern which often seem insignificant, but which help to bridge the gap between their two widely separated worlds. Other advisors at the Vietnamese naval shipyard in Saigon put their experience and skills to work, contribute their knowledge of improved shipbuilding techniques and new construction materials, develop procedures to help increase shipyard efficiency. At Chu Lai and Da Nang, at Tai Ninh and Pleiku, from the Delta to the Central Highlands, the Seabees, naval construction experts, are at work on a wide variety of vital projects. Often working behind the scenes, the Seabees don't make headlines, but without the things they do make, the headlines might never appear. From airfields and roads to hospitals and storage depots, the Navy construction battalions move from project to project, pursuing the accomplishment of their CB motto, Can Do. In addition to the Seabees, the Navy also staffs the OICC, Officer in Charge of Construction, which supervises civilian contractors in the world's largest single construction program. The OICC plans and builds military facilities throughout the country. At Saigon, the Navy has established the major medical facility for United States and allied personnel. The quality of medical service in Vietnam has reduced mortality from battlefield casualties to an unprecedented low. By the end of 1965, Head Soup Act, the in-country support activity, has grown into the Navy's largest single overseas shore command. And by June 1966, when it has been officially turned over to the Army, it is serving as chauffeur, mechanic, administrator, electrician, doctor, and policeman. It is generating electric power, providing warehouse facilities, operating an airline, and performing other services for thousands of allied personnel. To the north, at the port city of Da Nang, another United States naval support activity has been activated and is growing rapidly. These facilities, which will meet the demands of an expanded logistics support operation, include provisions for another large naval hospital. For the officers and men of the Navy and Marine Corps who serve on shore, the campaign in Vietnam is not only military in nature. CB technical assistance teams have helped with scores of civilian projects which will improve conditions for the South Vietnamese people. Roads, bridges, buildings, security hamlets to provide safety from Viet Cong terrorism. Clinics conducted by Navy doctors, dentists, and corpsmen have brought medical treatment and supplies to areas where they might otherwise never have been. Through people-to-people projects of many kinds, these men are working to win the confidence and restore the hopes of the Vietnamese through joint civilian-military action. This, too, is the American Navy in Vietnam. In terms of the variety and scope of the experience, Vietnam has already written a new chapter in the annals of naval history. Never before has the potential of the Navy Marine team been so fully realized. And yet, one important thing remains unchanged. The success of the overall effort will rely, as it always has, upon the acts of the individual man. Whatever credit is due will rest with many thousands of individual men who stand behind the aircraft, the ships, the boats, and the rifles from the Delta to the South China Sea. And whether he serves ashore, or in the rivers and coastal waters, at sea, or in the skies above, he will shoulder the responsibility for final success or failure, and he will be the one to make the needed sacrifice. And it is important to remember that no matter what his job or where his duty, he is the Navy's greatest single asset, the individual man. This is the American Navy in Vietnam, moving quickly where and when needed, displaying the flexibility of modern sea power, controlling the seas, extending its influence on land, and holding superiority in the air, a three-way force for peace, geared to meet aggression at any spot on the globe.
You mentioned Air America. Yeah, that's true. They got paid, but not very much, let me tell you. And then they worked under my shop for a long period of time, and they picked up more pilots than our Jolly Greens did over time in Laos. They were truly heroic, not properly recognized for this.
This T-28 is called, the name of it's called a Trojan. And the Trojan was a very versatile trainer, and because it had so much ability to carry armament, it made a great transition plane to go from trainer into fighter. It's a very strong airplane. It's rugged, very well built, and it's got a lot of history to it.
It would not be an exaggeration to say that news, if not history, was made at this particular Warbirds in Review forum. In this forum, spectators would be introduced to one of the most overlooked and underappreciated airplanes in the history of the U.S. Air Forces, the iconic North American T-28 Trojan, and the part it played in the secret war in Laos, the complicated and clandestine Southeast Asian conflict that began in the 1950s and ran until the U.S. departure in 1973. But it's the presenters who make the Warbirds in Review forums invaluable. Here, this week on this Wisconsin airfield, spectators will get these amazing stories firsthand from those who actually flew and fought, from those who were not just eyewitnesses to history, they were making history. The T-28 piston airplane was initially developed to replace the T-6, which had been training pilots since World War II. But it became so much more, as owner-pilot Ken Fardy explained to the audience.
This T-28 is called, the name of it's called a Trojan. And this is a C model, which was used for the carrier qualifications. And as you can see, this one is pretty well decked out for combat, but the T-28 had a much different role in the very beginning. It was a trainer. 1947, they needed a advanced trainer to take the place of their retiring T-6s that were teaching pilots to fly in World War II. And they needed something that would simulate the fighter jets that were coming online at that time. The cockpit in the T-28 is very similar, almost identical to the F-86. So it gave them a better understanding of what they were getting into before they actually went into a jet, the early jets. The Trojan was a very versatile trainer, and because it had so much ability to carry armament, it made a great transition plane to go from trainer into fighter. They always had the ability to carry machine guns, rockets, bombs. They even carried external fuel tanks. And eventually, when things started breaking out in Southeast Asia, they realized that they had a great platform, and they took the trainers and they took them back to North American, and they designed what they called the D model for Delta. And what they did was they beefed them up. They gave them extra hard points in the wings. They carried about 3,000 pounds of ordnance. And eventually they actually put ejection seats in them. They had what they call a Stanley Yankee ejection seat. And this plane here is painted in the Southeast Asia camo colors that represents the 1st Air Division, 2nd Fighter Squadron, which is the tiger on the tail, for the South Vietnamese Air Force. It's a very strong airplane. It's rugged, very well built, and it's got a lot of history to it.
Eventually, there were nearly 2,000 T-28s built. Perhaps the main reason they remained such a well-kept aviation secret is because so much of their work was done in secret, such as being the workhorse of the Air Force and CIA in the secret war in Laos, which was fought by men including Dick Welch and General Secord. As an Air Force officer and pilot, and as an officer on loan to the CIA, Major General Richard Secord compiled a notable career working in covert operations, including the secret war in Laos.
Our next guest is Dick Secord. He graduated from West Point in 1955, earned his Silver Wings in 56, had a distinguished 28 years as an Air Force officer, has a master's degree in international affairs from GW, finished the programs Air Command and Staff and the Naval War College at Newport. He spent a number of years as an instructor, but then in the early 60s became part of that first Air Commando wing, flying AT-28s, hundreds of missions in Southeast Asia. And then in the mid-60s, he was transferred to Udon in Thailand, and that's what we're going to hear about. This is General Dick Secord.
Thank you, David. I started, as he said, flying the AT-28. The Defense Department redesignated this particular genre of 28s, the AT-28, in the early 60s. And it had a number of models, as you've been told, carry about 3,500 pounds of ordnance. I never met a pilot who didn't like this airplane. It was agile, it was strong, took battle damage greatly, and so on. I could go on about it all day.
In a separate interview, General Secord talked about how an Army cadet graduate of West Point ends up in the United States Air Force.
With respect to going in the Air Force from West Point for many years before the Air Force Academy started operations, by agreement right after World War II, when they were forming a separate Air Force, the so-called Key West agreements took place. It is stipulated that about 30% of the graduates of West Point and 25% of the graduates of Annapolis would go into the Air Force.
The U.S. Air Force was established in the immediate aftermath of World War II. At a meeting of the service chiefs in Key West, Florida in 1948, an agreement drafted by James V. Forrestal, the first United States Secretary of Defense, outlined the division of air assets between the Army, Navy, and the newly created Air Force.
My first tour of duty in South Vietnam was started in 1962, flying T-28, AT-28Bs at the time. And we were not allowed to log our missions during most of that tour because we weren't there. I guess
what percentage of your missions that you flew were classified?
All of them.
Mm-hmm.
The cover was that we were there on training missions. I can honestly say, while I was in Vietnam at least, never flew any training missions.
Would you explain the politics of why we had to go into Laos, which was a neutral country according to Geneva Accords? So what forced us to go in there?
The Geneva Accords, signed in 1962, neutralized, theoretically, that area. Unfortunately, the enemy did not withdraw at all and, in fact, increased their presence. And although they denied it always, to the end, I think they still denied it. And we weren't there either, and we denied it. So we're both not there.
The Geneva Accords of 1962 were the result of an attempt to return Laos, a nation President Dwight David Eisenhower considered the cornerstone of Southeast Asia, to neutrality. Going back to 1945, when the communist Vietnamese leader Ho Chi Minh declared Vietnam's independence from France, the U.S. and the West held to the theory that a communist victory in one nation in Southeast Asia would quickly lead to communist takeovers in neighboring states. As it became increasingly apparent that the French were failing in their attempt to retake control of the area called Indochina, which the Japanese had occupied during World War II, President Eisenhower attempted to rally congressional and public support for the French by explaining the importance of that area to United States national interests. In a press conference held in April of 1954, Eisenhower coined one of the most famous of all Cold War phrases when he introduced the domino theory. I recall it was President Eisenhower who talked about the domino theory, and as I recall said that Laos was the first domino to fall, and for that reason we had to block the North Vietnamese from Laos. How successful were we?
Well, I think that was the impetus for the 62 Accords, which were signed during the Kennedy administration. And the so-called domino theory was quite prevalent in those times. Whether or not it bore fruit or not is still a subject of debate amongst scholars. But the scholars weren't fighting the war, and we were. And I think we did it effectively. Had we had more reasonable rules throughout, we would have prevailed absolutely. The evidence of that is the 12 days of Christmas in 1972, when our Air Force just pulverized, our Air Force and Army, Navy aviation pulverized North Vietnam. In 12 days, they had them on their knees. Had we done that 10 years earlier, or 8 years, or 5 years earlier, I think it would have been a different outcome.
Eisenhower said that you have a row of dominoes set up. You knock over the first one, and what will happen to the last one is that it will go over very quickly. This would lead to disintegration in Southeast Asia with the loss of Burma, of Thailand, of the peninsula, and Indonesia following.
The 1962, while I was in Vietnam the first time, they concluded the 1962 pact, which the U.S. was a signatory to, called the Geneva Accord. Among other things, this series of accords supposedly neutralized Laos. It required the withdrawal of all foreign forces, including specifically North Vietnamese Army and U.S. Army. The U.S. Army had a contingent in Laos as trainers called White Star. Before that time, they had to withdraw them, and we did. North Vietnamese did not. In fact, they increased their presence and started building what we came to call the Ho Chi Minh Trail, all during this time frame. I went back to South Vietnam briefly in 1966, and then I was on detail with CIA for 3 years as an air officer. They used to call us Christmas help. They needed some airmen, and it seemed like an exciting thing to do, so I was able to volunteer for that. No, you're just on loan to the agency. You retain your status as a commissioned officer if you're an officer. The difference is you're in an organization which is legally authorized to do certain operations under Title 50 of the U.S. Code. The military is funded under Title and controlled under Title 10. So you're moving into a more unconventional area. But again, I say you're just on loan. They spent a good deal of time on Geneva Convention strictures with us, but often we didn't wear rank. We wore pretty much what we wanted, especially in the first 3 or 4 months. We were not allowed to log the missions. That continued until about halfway through my tour there. The agency needed some people in their air branch because who were current, experienced tactical pilots, because that's not the way they're structured. They don't have too many fighter pilots on their active ones on their roles. But they ended up being effectively in charge of the war in Laos. The CIA fell heir to that war by default, you might say, because we had to withdraw military forces. We had to react to what was going on, and that was CIA. And they had many thousands of indigenous so-called troops that they were supporting and trying to train and so forth. And there are 5 military regions in Laos. Just in LR2 alone, where the famous Hmong mountain tribesmen were located. When I first got there, they had 80,000 of them in the rolls. They managed to attrit quite a few of those, but that was, a pretty sizable force. In Laos, there were really two different kinds of war. The war on the Panhandle, which was crucial to our interests, where the Ho Chi Minh Trail was, their only supply line really into South Vietnam after they stopped the infiltrations by sea, which was fairly easy. But the truck traffic just grew and grew and grew. And it wasn't just one road, it was a bunch of motorable dirt trails down through jungle and the karst that fanned out all the way along the border. Interdicting that line of communications was crucial, but we never seemed to get that. Mainly, I guess, because the strict reading of the Geneva Accords of '62 prohibited that. And then once again, we played by the rules. The enemy did not.
One of the most heroic groups under the command of General Secord and the CIA in Laos were the Forward Air Controllers, or FACs, nicknamed the Ravens. Writer Christopher Robbins described this covert corps of pilots like this, quote, "The FAC was essential to every aspect of the military operation. It was his job to find the target, order up fighter bombers, mark the target accurately with white phosphorus smoke rockets, and control the operation throughout the time the planes remained on station. The FAC then stayed over the target to make a bomb damage assessment. Putting on a strike meant that you were busier than a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest," the pilot said, unquote. Where else are you likely to meet a legendary Raven firsthand than during a Warbirds in Review?
This is Dick Welch here, and he was a Raven. And there's a little forward in the book that I'm going to read from you here that'll really kind of set the stage of this. The book was about the war in Southeast Asia from 1961 to 73. It says, quote, "While America and the rest of the world watched on television a handful of elite Air Force pilots wearing anything but uniforms and piloting unarmored small prop-driven aircraft fought a secret war, one that remains secret up to this day. The few pilots who knew about it called it the Other Theater, a small nation called Laos next to the Ho Chi Minh Trail, China and Thailand. These incredibly brave and skilled pilots were known as the Ravens. Fly low, slow, spot the enemy, and direct winged artillery of American airstrikes from South Vietnam, Thailand, and aircraft carriers." Now, that's what they did. That was their mission. And this is one of them. And this is Dick Welch. He has a DFC with 1 Oak Leaf Feather, 13 Air Medals, numerous Laos awards, which he cannot interpret what they are, so he just knows he has them. He flew Covey FAC, and we'll talk about that in a minute, let you explain what that was, in OV-10s prior to the Ravens. So if you can tell them what Covey FAC is.
The Covey FAC was a call sign. Anybody who was in Southeast Asia during that time, it was interesting when you came back and you met somebody, you'd say, "What was your call sign?" The call sign stayed the same when you left. Somebody, the next people, and they used the same call sign for the same equipment at the same base. So a Covey FAC with a first letter of 5 flew into Laos on all his missions. So all my missions, even though half my time was based in Vietnam, all my missions were in Laos.
Just give us a typical mission.
Typical mission would be.
And what time you left, and
typical mission was daylight only. We didn't fly dark. So we'd take off early in the morning, and more often than not, we'd have the coordinates of some place that the CIA, the road team people had identified. There's a building out there full of munitions. And we go out there, and you'd fly over, and it's double canopy. You can't see anything. You could put some ordnance on it, but you probably wouldn't get it. And if you did, they'd just move it, or the next day they'd have guns there. So we would fly over the targets that they had identified. The intelligence is really good. And if we saw an target an opportunity that something was moving, well, we just go to that. But the one I'm thinking about is it was a building as big as one of these hangars. It was in double canopy, and each of the four guys at Proxy looked at it for 2 or 3 days in a row, and finally the agency guys come by. Hey, don't you pay attention to us, And he said, well, we pay attention, but if we hang out, they'll put up some guns and shoot us down. So we all took turns going over at different times of the day, and once we were out there, we would stop at these dirt strips and refuel. So you'd leave Proxy in the morning. It was a place much like this, a paved road and runway and all. If you came to one in the late in the afternoon, and the CIA guys weren't there, we didn't know if it was in our control. You couldn't land. But anyway, we did get a big building. Finally, the sun was just right, and you could see the ridge building, and we put T-28 napalm on it, and it burned for all day and went up about 3,000 feet. It was mixed munitions for sure, because you could see different kinds of colored smoke and different tracers coming out of it, and it really set them back.
Did you feel like when you finished your tour of duty that you had been effective? That what you guys were doing was
by
effective?
zip code, yeah, we kept them back on their heels and where I was. This was after we went into Cambodia in May of '70, and their reaction to that was they moved the Ho Chi Minh Trail closer to the people, the Royal Lao and Pak Se that we were supporting. So it became more intense for them, and to keep them back at their old property line, which is about halfway across Laos. Yeah, we sent them back.
The secret war in Laos also gave notoriety to another, mostly misunderstood, CIA aerial operation, commonly known as Air America. Unfortunately, much of the public came to know about this unit through that most unreliable of all historical sources, the Hollywood movie. The movie portrayed a shadowy, CIA enterprise involved in activities from delivering the illegal drugs of corrupt Laotian military leaders to black market weapons dealing. The film was a gross disservice to those who risked all in the service of our country and the cause of freedom in Southeast Asia, according to those who were there.
He mentioned Air America. Yeah, that's true. They got paid, but not very much, let me tell you. And then they worked under my shop for a long period of time, and they picked up more pilots than our Jolly Greens did over time in Laos. They were truly heroic, not properly recognized for this.
Air America was, in fact, a passenger and cargo airline owned by the U.S. government. Its operating ethos was, quote, anything, anywhere, anytime, professionally, unquote. Its aircraft included the Curtiss C-46 Commando, the Pilatus PC-6 Porter, the de Havilland Canada DH-04, the C-130, and the Fairchild C-123 Provider. Along with the UH-34D, the Bell 204B, 205, and CH-47C helicopters, Air America flew many types of cargo to countries including the Republic of Vietnam, the kingdoms of Laos and Cambodia, and even top-secret missions into Burma and the People's Republic of China.
Well, with respect to Air America, that's a story all its own, and the U.S. government has not recognized them adequately, in my opinion. All these irregular forces over the years with airlift and resupply, all these teams I mentioned that are along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, they were resupplied by night airdrops with caribous, the noisemaker, for example. Those are Air America airplanes. their C-123s did Trojan work. As I mentioned, their helicopter pilots were famous. Most of them were former military people. The myth was that they were very highly paid mercenaries. I thought they were very lowly paid mercenaries, if you want to call them that, but they weren't paid a lot of money. I know because I ran them for 3 years. And so, effectively, if they didn't run me, they were legendary in my view. So the movie Air America, just as I said earlier, was a guy with hogwash and smuggling drugs and all that. You could never use them as drug smugglers. We had more than 100 CIA officers overseeing them. You know, how long do you think they're going to get away with smuggling drugs under those circumstances? The AT-28 served in combat in all three of the Indochina countries for a long, long time. Everybody knows in reveres the Mustangs and the Thunderbolts and the P-38s and so forth. Almost nobody knows about the AT-28s, which actually served in combat longer than any of those birds did. So just kind of a pet peeve of mine. The pilots who flew these airplanes who were exceptionally bold, and casualty rates were significant, no doubt, but the damage that they wrought was just disproportionate to their numbers. We only had about 100 of these airplanes at any given time.
How could we have prosecuted it more effectively?
Interdicted the Ho Chi Minh Trail with troops rather than trying to do it with forward air controllers and tactical air, and struck north as we did in Linebacker 2 at the same time. It would have been over in a fortnight. Those two actions simultaneously would have put them back decades. I mean, they would have tossed the towel in faster than you could say your name, in my opinion. The United States lost that war. I've heard a lot of people try to argue that no, we didn't really, in the bigger picture, what developed thereafter, rapprochement with China and so forth, proved that we really won the big war. That's just hogwash. We lost the war, but we lost it politically. There's no question about that. But the war really had been going on, the shooting war had been going on for, 13 years that I've described so far. The American body politic is famous for having a fairly short span of support when it comes to warfare, especially with American troops. And there were a lot of casualties in that war. 58,000 men killed in that war. No small thing. And the one thing that that our foes and potential enemies understand is power. They understand that. They understand it very well. They understand it in the Middle East. They understand it throughout that region. If you want to play the game of nations, you've got to have all the instruments necessary. Not just diplomacy, not just intelligence, but you've got to have the military. And you can have the best military around, which I think we probably do, ounce for ounce, dollar for dollar. I think we do. But if you don't have the political will, then you're whistling Dixie.
If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.